to World News. My name's Tiffany Mendez.
And I'm Courtney Shaw.
And today we're going to be covering the topic of World War II.
Let's start off with the battles.
Yes, of course.
Let's start off by discussing the Battle of Britain.
In 1940, the Germans had become extremely powerful after conquering France via the Blitzkrieg or lightning war tactic, and they wished to expand further. Therefore, shortly following the fall of France in the spring of 1940, the Germans chose their next target, Britain. This was the birth of Hitler's Operation Sea Lion. He wished to obtain air superiority over southern Britain and the English Channel by destroying the British Air Force and aircraft industry. In order to pursue their plans, the Germans would need to defeat the Royal Air Force, and then they would need to cross the English Channel and land in Britain.
On July 10, 1940, the Luftwaffe, led by Hermann Göring, began bombing British harbours and shipping facilities in southern England. Later in August, the Germans turned their attention to aim at British airfields and air factories. Preceding this event, on August 24th, the German planes bombed several areas in London. As a response, the Royal Air Force, headed by Sir Hugh Dowding's Fighter Command, bombed the German city of Berlin. Enraged, Hitler ordered the Luftwaffe to bomb London and other British cities in an event which became known as the Blitz. London was bombed for 57 consecutive nights, and this continued over the period of several weeks. During this chaos, buildings were destroyed and prior places of residence, forcing the people out of the little comfort their homes provided and onto dangerous streets. Residents sought out shelter wherever they could. Many fled to the underground stations, which resulted in housing up to 177,000 during those dreadful nights.
Finally, after a 12-week battle, on September 15, 1940, Hitler accepted defeat after the RAF shot down too many German bombers. Nazis lost 57 planes and the RAF lost merely 28. The Nazis realized that they weren't trained nor were they equipped for the long-range fights in the air. Moreover, they had previously relied on close air support for the ground forces. This, however, wasn't the case in this particular battle. Even though this battle was one of the bloodiest, including more than 23,000 soldiers and many civilians killed, it was a victory for Britain and the Allies. Despite the fact that the Nazis outnumbered the RAF, they put up a strong fight and defended themselves. The British possessed a very advanced radar system, which warned them of German air raids. This proved extremely helpful against the widely separated airfield attacks they received from the Nazis. Pilots who had crash-landed or parachuted out of their aircrafts could return to the fight because of the location of the battle. Additionally, they had very effective fighter planes, such as the Spitfires and Hurricanes, along with reinforcements of pilots, planes, and supplies, all of which were supplied by the Commonwealth countries.
As a result, 1,733 German aircraft had been destroyed and only 915 British fighters. Furthermore, the Battle of Britain was the first military campaign fought entirely in the air. The victory of this battle was very significant because had the Germans taken over Britain, the rest of the world, including North America, would have been the next target.
Wow, it's a good thing that we won the Battle of Britain, or else the world today would have been very different.
That's so true. Now let's move on. In 1942, the Soviet Union lost many soldiers to Germany and needed help from Allies to force Germany into a two-front war. On August 19, 1942, the Allies raided the French port of Dieppe in France. The Dieppe raid, also known as Operation Jubilee, resulted disastrously in a 9-hour-long battle. The 2nd Canadian Division was the main attack force during this raid. The initial plan was to launch 4 attacks along the coast before dawn and then launch a main attack at Dieppe. However, things didn't go as planned. A Canadian ship carrying soldiers at Dieppe met a small German convoy and a brief battle erupted. This alerted the Germans on shore. The Allied trucks were inefficient due to lack of traction and had trouble moving up the steep pebbled beach. Moreover, the ships were delayed, causing the troops to land in broad daylight where the Germans were expecting them. The heavy use of machine guns caused the most devastation as tanks were ineffective because of the pebbled beaches and shorelines. Wanting to test out new techniques and equipment, clear signs of negligence were shown by the Allies. Communication between ships and troops was also poor online. Reinforcements were sent too soon since they thought the first wave of soldiers had reached the town, when in fact they hadn't. They were also easily shot down by Germans since they were trapped as a result of this. With a death toll of 907, near 600 wounded soldiers, and 1,946 imprisoned, this battle was destined to end in tragedy as it was lacking a solid plan. However, the Allies were taught a lot, and this disaster of a battle encouraged them to fight harder and plan vigorously in the future battle.
Wow, the Dieppe raid was such a terrible disaster.
Yes, well, they learned from their mistakes, as was shown in the Battle of D-Day, which we shall move on to. On June 6, 1944, the Allies launched Operation Overlord, which was also known as Normandy or D-Day. This took place as an attempt to reclaim France from Germany. The commander of the Allies was General Dwight Eisenhower, with Erwin Rommel as the leader of the Nazis. The attacks occurred on 5 beaches along the Normandy coast of northern France. The code names, which were different for every country, are as follows: Juno for Canada, Gold and Sword for Britain, Omaha and Utah for America. Around 156,000 American, British, and Canadian forces arrived at the coast prepared to fight. Preparation time for this battle was just over a year. The Americans had just entered the war in December of 1941 after the Japanese unsuspectedly attacked Pearl Harbor. The Allies invaded France, which was under German control. The Royal Canadian Air Force provided 100 ships and 14,000 Canadian soldiers, along with 36 bomber squadrons, along for a well-planned invasion. Several factors kept this battle from ending in disaster like the previous Dieppe raid. 1 million troops were able to make it to France, along with military supplies and vehicles, thanks to naval support, which allowed for successful transportation. With the storm breaking out, the initial attack was delayed, throwing off German judgment. They believed the Allies would be unable to land and therefore attack. Unsuspecting German forces were caught off guard when there was, in fact, an attack from the Allies. There were 14,000 Canadians who arrived on Juno Beach, and 359 died, and 715 were wounded.
Wow, D-Day was such a great victory for the Allies.
Yes, indeed. And now we'll talk about the Holocaust after this short break. Nazi progression is moving rapidly, and Canada is next on their agenda.
We must stop them now. Yes, troops are important, but what can you do for Canada?
Canada needs you. You need to produce more food so we can help feed our fellow Canadians.
Join munition factories and help supply troops with equipment to defeat the enemy.
Women are needed to look after these farms while their brave husbands, brothers, and sons serve in the troops overseas.
These crops will feed our troops.
We are proud to serve our country.
Even women are needed to drive the trucks that deliver the crucial supplies to our troops during the war.
This equipment is crucial for the troops to win the war.
Join the munitions factories to help support them. I'm a proud woman serving her country.
Support war on all fronts. The troops are depending on you.
We're girlies from the 30s, wash the dishes, scrub the floor. When all of a sudden, our hubbies went to war. Did you think we'd shrink in England's needy hour? Yeah, what? Of course not. 'Cause we got girl power. Our men are fighting World War II, but we're not gonna boo-hoo-hoo. It's our World War II too, girls. Plenty we can do, girls. We're the World War II girls. Our war begins right here. I make weapons in the factory, drill and...
After Kristallnacht or Crystal Night in November, many Jewish people decided to leave Germany. However, leaving wasn't very simple. Visas and money were required to leave Germany, and visas were extremely difficult to obtain quickly, and for many, they arrived too late. On May 13, 1939, the German ship St. Louis sailed from Hamburg, Germany for Havana, Cuba. 937 passengers were on the voyage, and almost all of them were fleeing from the Third Reich when the Nazis were in power in Germany. Most voyagers were German citizens from Eastern Europe, and a few were officially stateless. The majority of Jewish passengers had applied for a U.S. visa and had plans of staying in Cuba until they were allowed entry into the U.S. However, little did the passengers know that by the time the St. Louis sailed, the political conditions in Cuba seemed unstable. There were signs that the passengers wouldn't be allowed to land there. The U.S. State Department in Washington, the U.S. Consulate in Havana, some Jewish organizations, and most refugee agencies had prior knowledge of the situation. Since the passengers weren't told about this, most were compelled to return to Europe. Owners of the St. Louis had also known about the trouble that the Jews would face even before the ship sailed. Cuban Director General of Immigration, who issued the passengers landing certificates and transit visas, was unaware of the fact that the Cuban president Federico Lardo Bru had just last week issued a decree before the ship set sail that invalidated all recently issued landing certificates. Written authorization from the Cuban Secretaries of State and Labor and the posting of 500 bond was required in order to enter Cuba. Upon their arrival to the port of Havana, the Jews attempted to negotiate with the Cuban government to allow them to enter, but this failed. Similar attempts with the US and Canada also failed. The ship ended up returning to Europe after waiting 12 days on the port of Havana and off the coast of Miami. 4 weeks later, the Belgian king and prime minister agreed that 200 passengers could land in Belgium. 3 days later, on June 13, the British, French, and Dutch governments agreed to let the refugees temporarily seek shelter in their countries. However, as the Germans continued to invade Europe and take over countries, a lot of the members of the ship found themselves stuck under Nazi rule once again, and this time, not a lot of them survived the Holocaust. What seemed to many Jews as their last chance to escape the horror in Germany had ended up failing them. While the St. Louis incident shows how disgustingly racist and prejudiced lots of people were back in those days.
Yes. And now let's move on to the final solution in concentration camps.
The final solution was the Nazi plan for the genocide of Jewish people. Hermann Göring, who was a member of the Nazi Party, sent an order to Reinhard Heydrich, who was chief of security police, to solve the Jewish immigration problem. Hitler had approved the message and allowed the use of the railway system to transport Jews from Austria, Czechoslovakia, and Germany, and occupy Poland and the Soviet Union. This took place in Germany and areas the Germans conquered in the 1940s. In addition, concentration camps were set up. There were 6 major camps set up: Bergen, Belsen, and Buchenwald in Germany, and Auschwitz and Treblinka in Poland. Between the time period of 1933 and 1945, the Nazis and its allies established more than 40,000 concentration camps. They were established as early as 1933. The first mass gassing of the Jews was in Chelmno on the 8th of December 1940. Camps were designed to detain or confine people under harsh conditions. Here, healthy people worked as slave laborers, and the weak, old, and young were killed in gas chambers. When the healthy prisoners were overworked, starved, or diseased, they would be murdered. Guards would strip them of their clothes and valuables and shave their heads, and also separated families. Other tactics were also used to exterminate Jews. The euthanasia program had been in effect since October 1939. The Nazis had been murdering mentally and physically disabled people. Doctors killed them by lethal injections, but later introduced the gassing process. Over 70,000 people were killed this way. Later, mobile gas vans were implemented, which went along with the shooting operations and pumped poisonous carbon monoxide gas into sealed spaces, killing those inside. This was introduced when the Einsatzgruppen was deemed inefficient and slow. On January 20th, 1942, the Wannsee Conference was held to discuss the deportation of Jews, but it was actually the execution of Jews. During the Holocaust, 6 million Jewish men, women, and children were killed. This was 2/3 of the Jews living in Europe before the Second World War.
During the final solution in concentration camps, Jews and undesirables were punished for no apparent reason.
Yes, and to elaborate on the issue of the Holocaust, we have a special guest who is a Jew who survived the whole thing.
Today I will be interviewing a very special guest, Ezra, a Holocaust survivor. Welcome to the show, Ezra.
Thank you for having me.
You lived through the final solution implemented by Hitler in the 1940s. How has that changed your life?
I was a very young boy at the time. I was very innocent and fun-loving like any other kid. However, I saw my early years of life altered and altered my perception of the world completely. I witnessed the death of so many people, people that I loved, and there was so much pain everywhere. It was such a helpless time back then. We were one of the lucky families. We were able to escape to my aunt in Britain.
What groups of people were targeted by the Nazis?
Well, Hitler wanted a master race of Aryans and despised all non-Aryans, including Jewish, Roma, Slav, and undesirables such as people with physical and mental disabilities, as well as communists, socialists, and even homosexuals. That devil wanted to isolate all of us in his German society and blamed us Jews for all the ills of the world.
What types of tactics did you witness that the Nazis used against the people?
Well, first, the Nazis banned non-Aryans and undesirables from teaching and attending schools. My neighbor, she was a nice old lady, was fired from her job as a result. They'd also denied us from holding government office and writing books. The most obvious change was the introduction of the dreaded Nuremberg laws. They had prohibited Jews from marrying or having any relationship with anyone of German or related blood, and they made it illegal for us to be lawyers and doctors.
Who did the Nuremberg laws apply to?
According to the laws, someone with 3 or 4 Jewish grandparents was a Jew regardless of what they practiced or even if they had converted to another religion.
How were Jews identified?
Well, like everyone in Germany, we had to carry identity cards. This one was mine.
Interesting.
As well, we had the Star of David, and it had to be worn. And new middle names were issued for all Jews whose names weren't clearly recognizable. For example, Sarah for females and Israel for males.
What about the Star of David?
Well, yes, that also had to be worn at all times. Some had a white band with a blue star in the middle. All of these tactics were used to identify us clearly in a crowd. We were branded like objects, and it was very disgraceful. I have my star, which has an H for Holland.
Why were these issued?
Well, it just identified us. Some people had different colors if they were homosexual or a different type of immigrant. We had clearly one for Jews.
So Ezra, were you affected by the Kristallnacht or Crystal Night?
On November 9th, 1938, I'd finally gotten somewhat of a good night's sleep after a long time. Soon, screams filled the air, as did bullets. It was gradually coming closer and closer, and my heart was pounding like crazy. My family of 6 gathered around the window and watched in horror as people were dragged out of their homes and murdered on the streets. Synagogues were burned to the ground. Store windows of Jewish shops were broken, and houses and apartments of Jews were destroyed. Many Jews were arrested, beaten, and killed. My father was taken that night. I never saw him again.
So Ezra, are you okay to continue on and proceed to talk about the ghettos?
Yes.
Okay, so what can you tell us about the ghettos?
Well, they were created for separating, persecuting, and destroying Europe's Jews. In conditions filled with disease and starvations, many inhabitants died or were shot or even deported to killing centers. The ghettos were disgusting. They were overcrowded and unsanitary.
Do you know anything about Einsatzgruppen?
Well, in order to increase the amount of space available in the ghettos, they issued the Einsatzgruppen. They were mobile killing squads, and they followed around the German army into Poland and Russia. They shot prisoners after taking them out of their towns or villages into a forest or open land and made them dig pits and undress.
Thank you, Ezra, for coming onto our set and talking about something that was obviously very difficult for you to speak about. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.